I want you to know something right now, before I tell you the rest of this story. When you're lying in a hospital bed at 63 years old, staring at a ceiling tile with a water stain shaped like a broken heart, and the surgeon tells you the procedure went well, but you'll need someone to pick you up because you absolutely cannot drive yourself home, you start making a mental list. A list of people who love you. People you've spent decades loving back. And I'm here to tell you that sometimes, that list gets a lot shorter than you ever imagined it could be. My name is Eleanor. Eleanor Catherine Wright. And 3 weeks ago, I learned what it feels like to be invisible to the people you raised. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Because this story, what I'm about to share with you, it's not just mine anymore. It belongs to anyone who's ever felt forgotten by their own family. And if that resonates with you, if you've ever been there, then please, check the description box below. There are more stories like this one, stories that remind us we're not alone in these moments. Subscribe if you want to hear them. Share this if you think someone else needs to. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. It started with a phone call I didn't want to make. My doctor's voice had been gentle but firm when she'd given me the news 4 months earlier. A mass. Benign probably, but we needed to be sure. The kind of procedure that required specialists, the kind you can't get done in a small town like Millbrook, Ohio, where everyone knows your business before you've even finished living it. So they scheduled me for a surgery 2 states away, in Pittsburgh, at a hospital I'd never heard of with doctors whose names I couldn't pronounce. I'm not someone who asks for help easily. Never have been. When my husband Daniel died 7 years ago from a heart attack that came out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning while he was mowing the lawn, I learned to stand on my own 2 feet real fast. I learned to fix the garbage disposal, to change my own oil, to sleep alone in a bed that suddenly felt enormous. I raised my son Robert by myself after that, even though he was already 28 and married with a baby on the way. I didn't burden him with my grief. That's what mothers do. We carry things so our children don't have to. But this was different. The surgical consent forms had been very clear. Someone responsible had to pick me up. No Ubers. No cabs. No public transportation. A person who would stay with me for at least 24 hours afterward, who would make sure I didn't have complications, who would call 911 if something went wrong. I had 1 week before the procedure when I created that family group chat. It took me 20 minutes to type out the message because my hands were shaking. Not from fear of the surgery, but from the vulnerability of asking. Hello everyone. As you know, I have my procedure scheduled for next Wednesday in Pittsburgh. I'll be staying overnight for observation, and they're releasing me Thursday afternoon. My train gets back to Millbrook Station at 3 p.m. Would anyone be able to pick me up? I'll need some help for the first day or so. I added a heart emoji at the end. Then deleted it. Then added it back. Robert responded first. My boy. My only child. The one I'd rocked through colic and chickenpox, whose hand I'd held on his first day of kindergarten, whose college tuition I'd paid by working double shifts at the diner for 4 straight years. Mom, I really wish you'd given us more notice. We've got Bennett's soccer tournament that whole weekend and Chelsea's been planning this for months. Bennett. My grandson. 8 years old with Daniel's same crooked smile. The tournament was 3 hours away in Columbus. They'd mentioned it once, maybe twice, in passing. Then Chelsea, my daughter-in-law, chimed in. Eleanor, we've literally got plans all day Thursday. I've got a hair appointment at noon that I've been waiting 6 weeks for, and then we have to prep for the tournament. Maybe try a rideshare? They're really reliable now. I stared at those messages for a long time. Long enough that the screen went dark and I had to tap it back to life. Long enough that I read them 17 times, looking for something I'd missed. Some warmth. Some concern. Some acknowledgement that their mother, their family, was about to go under anesthesia and have a mass removed from her body 2 states away. The thing about text messages is they strip away all the pretense. There's no tone to misinterpret, no facial expression to soften the blow. Just words. Cold, clear, unmistakable words. I typed back slowly, carefully, each letter a small act of dignity I was clinging to. No worries. I'll figure it out. Then I set my phone down and I cried. Not the pretty kind of crying you see in movies, but the ugly kind that comes from somewhere deep in your chest, the kind that makes your whole body shake. Because in that moment, I understood something I'd been avoiding for years. I had become optional. Somewhere along the way, while I was busy being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who never needed anything from anyone, I had taught my family that I didn't matter. That my needs could wait. That a hair appointment and a soccer tournament were more important than making sure I didn't wake up alone and disoriented in a strange city after surgery. But here's what they didn't know. Here's what they couldn't have possibly understood about the woman they'd just dismissed with such casual cruelty. I had spent 7 years learning how to be alone. 7 years building a life they knew nothing about. 7 years making connections and friendships in places they'd never bothered to ask about. And one of those connections was about to change everything. When I opened my phone again, my hands had stopped shaking. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was something else entirely. I was done. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't texted in almost 3 months. A name that represented a part of my life Robert and Chelsea had always been too busy to care about, too self-absorbed to even notice. James, I typed. I hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a situation. His response came back in less than 30 seconds. Eleanor, I'm already looking at train schedules. Text me the details. I'll be there. Just like that. No excuses. No negotiations. No mention of hair appointments or soccer tournaments or his own very busy, very full life. I didn't tell Robert. I didn't tell Chelsea. I simply let them believe I'd figured it out on my own, the way I always did. The way they expected me to. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly imagined as they went about their plans and their preparations, was that their Thursday afternoon was about to implode in a way that would make them question everything they thought they knew about me. Because James wasn't just a friend. And when he walked into that train station to pick me up, when he wrapped his arms around me in front of God and everybody, when he kissed my forehead and told me he'd been worried sick, when he loaded my bag into his Mercedes and drove me not to my empty house but to his home where he'd prepared a guest room and stocked the fridge with my favorite foods, someone was going to see us. This is a small town. People talk. And by Thursday evening, my phone was going to light up like a Christmas tree with 52 missed calls and a whole lot of questions I had no intention of answering. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I had to survive the surgery. I had to survive the train ride home, weak and exhausted and still recovering. I had to survive the moment when I would realize that the family I'd built my entire life around had become strangers who couldn't spare 3 hours on a Thursday afternoon. And then, only then, could I show them what they'd really lost. The surgery itself is mostly a blur now. I remember the anesthesiologist's calm voice counting backward, remember the chemical taste at the back of my throat, remember the strange dream about Daniel that felt more like a visitation than a memory. When I woke up, groggy and disoriented, a nurse named Patricia was checking my vitals and telling me I'd done great, that everything had gone exactly as planned. The mass was benign. I'd be fine. 6 weeks recovery and I'd be good as new. I texted the family group chat from my hospital bed with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else, still clumsy from the anesthesia. Surgery went well. Benign. Coming home tomorrow as scheduled. Robert responded 3 hours later with a thumbs up emoji. Chelsea didn't respond at all. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who are supposed to love you most, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That hollow feeling in your chest that has nothing to do with surgical incisions and everything to do with emotional ones. If you're watching this and you've been there, don't forget to check the description box below. There are more stories there from people who understand. People who've survived this kind of quiet devastation and came out stronger on the other side. I spent that night in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and recycled air, watching bad television and trying not to think about how I'd ended up here. Alone at 63, recovering from surgery in a city where I didn't know a single soul, while my family prepared for a soccer tournament. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about James. James Mitchell had walked into my life 18 months ago at a community art class I'd started taking on Tuesday evenings. It was something I'd done for myself, something that had nothing to do with being Robert's mother or Daniel's widow or anyone's anything. Just me, Eleanor, trying to remember what it felt like to create something beautiful. He'd sat down at the easel next to mine that first night, a man about my age with silver hair and kind eyes, and he'd looked at my attempt at a still life and said, "You're being too careful. Art is about taking risks." We'd become friends slowly, carefully, the way people our age do when we've both been hurt before. Coffee after class turned into long walks through the park. Long walks turned into dinners at quiet restaurants where we talked about books and music and the strange experience of rebuilding your life after loss. His wife had passed away from cancer 4 years earlier. He understood grief. He understood loneliness. He understood the peculiar pain of being forgotten by adult children who were too busy with their own lives to notice yours was falling apart. We'd never called it dating. We'd never put a label on it. But somewhere along the way, James had become the person I called when something funny happened, when something sad happened, when I just needed to hear a friendly voice that actually cared about my answer when he asked how I was doing. Robert didn't know about James. Not because I was hiding it, but because he'd never asked. Never inquired about my Tuesday evening classes, or who I spent my time with, or whether I was lonely in that big empty house. He'd assumed I was fine because I'd always been fine, because that's what I'd trained him to believe. Chelsea definitely didn't know. Chelsea, who barely acknowledged my existence except when she needed a babysitter for Bennett on short notice, which happened more often than you'd think for a woman who was apparently too busy with hair appointments to pick up her mother-in-law from the train station. When I'd texted James about needing a ride, I hadn't expected his response to be so immediate, so unreservedly supportive. But that was James. That's who he was. A man who showed up. A man who meant it when he asked if you needed help. The train ride home Thursday afternoon was miserable. Everything hurt. The surgical sites throbbed despite the pain medication. My head felt stuffed with cotton. I kept dozing off and jerking awake, disoriented, forgetting where I was. An older gentleman across the aisle kept giving me concerned looks, probably wondering if I was going to pass out. I texted James when we were 30 minutes out from Millbrook. Almost there. Feeling pretty rough. I'm already at the station. Front entrance. Take your time. When the train finally pulled into Millbrook Station at 3:07 p.m., I gathered my overnight bag with movements that felt like I was underwater. Every step down from the train car required concentration. The platform seemed to tilt slightly, though I knew that was just the medication and the exhaustion. And then I saw him. James was standing by his car, parked right at the front entrance in a spot that technically wasn't a parking space, but he'd claimed it anyway. He was wearing a blue sweater I told him once made his eyes look younger. His face broke into a smile when he saw me, but then concern quickly replaced it as he registered how unsteady I was. He closed the distance between us in seconds, taking my bag from my hand and wrapping his other arm around my waist for support. "Eleanor. God, you should have let me come to Pittsburgh. You shouldn't have made this trip alone." I leaned into him, too tired to pretend I didn't need the support, too grateful to care who might see us. "I'm okay. I'm better now." He kissed my forehead, gentle and quick, a gesture that was so natural between us I didn't think anything of it. Then he guided me to the car, settled me into the passenger seat with the careful attention of someone who genuinely cared, and loaded my bag into the trunk. I didn't notice Sharon Matthews standing by the coffee shop entrance, phone in hand. I didn't notice Bill Henderson sitting in his truck 3 spaces over, watching. I didn't notice any of the half-dozen people who were about to call Robert and Chelsea within the next 45 minutes with variations of the same urgent message. "Your mother just got picked up from the train station by some man, and honey, it didn't look like just friends." James drove me to his house, a beautiful craftsman-style home on the north side of town that I'd been to dozens of times but never under these circumstances. He'd prepared the guest room with fresh sheets and extra pillows. He'd stocked his fridge with ginger ale and crackers and soup, all the bland foods the hospital discharge papers had recommended. He'd even bought fresh flowers for the nightstand, a small detail that made my eyes water. "You didn't have to do all this," I said as he showed me around, pointing out where everything was, making sure I knew I just had to call if I needed anything during the night. "Eleanor." He stopped and looked at me directly, seriously. "You've spent the last year and a half listening to me talk about losing Margaret, helping me remember how to live again. You think I wasn't going to show up for you when you actually needed someone? I wanted to hug him. I wanted to tell him how much it meant that he'd given me what my own family couldn't be bothered to provide, basic human compassion. But I was so tired, and everything hurt, and I was afraid if I started crying I wouldn't be able to stop. Thank you, I whispered, for seeing me. He squeezed my hand. Get some rest. I'll check on you in a couple hours. I slept for 3 hours straight, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that only comes from complete physical and emotional exhaustion. When I woke up, the late afternoon sun was streaming through the guest room window in golden slants. My phone was buzzing on the nightstand. 1 missed call from Robert. 3 missed calls from Chelsea. Then 5 more from Robert. Then 7 from Chelsea. Then texts started coming through. Robert, Mom, call me right now. Chelsea, Eleanor, we need to talk. This is important. Robert, I'm serious, pick up your phone. Chelsea, who is he? Robert, Sharon Matthews just called and said you got picked up by some man at the train station. What the hell is going on? I lay there in James's guest bed, staring at my phone, watching the messages accumulate. Watching my family, who couldn't spare 3 hours to pick me up, lose their minds over the fact that someone else had. And here's what I want you to understand. Here's the part that might make me sound cold or calculating or cruel, depending on your perspective. I knew this would happen. Maybe not consciously, maybe not in a planned, deliberate way. But some part of me, some tired, hurt, overlooked part of me, had known that bringing James into this equation would force my family to finally see me again. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was suddenly very, very visible. And I wasn't ready to answer their questions yet. I wasn't ready to soothe their concerns or explain myself or make them feel better about the situation they'd created with their own neglect. So I turned my phone off. I got up slowly, carefully, and walked to James's kitchen where I could smell something delicious simmering on the stove. He turned when he heard me, smile soft and welcoming. How are you feeling? I made soup. Nothing fancy, just chicken and vegetables. I feel like I just turned my family's world upside down, I said. Then I started laughing. It hurt my surgical sights to laugh, but I couldn't stop. They're losing their minds because someone came to pick me up from the train station. James's expression shifted to something harder, something almost protective. Good. Maybe they should lose their minds a little. Maybe they should think about why a stranger, comparatively speaking, was there for you and they weren't. You're not a stranger, I said quietly. No, he agreed. I'm not. By the time I turned my phone back on 3 hours later, there were 52 missed calls. 52. And that's when I realized something had fundamentally shifted. Something I couldn't take back even if I wanted to. My family was about to learn that I wasn't just their mother, their mother-in-law, their convenient sometimes babysitter. I was Eleanor Catherine Wright. And I had a whole life they knew nothing about. The voicemail started around 5:30 p.m. Thursday evening and didn't stop until almost 9 p.m. I listened to them all, sitting in James's living room with a cup of tea going cold in my hands, and I felt something shift inside me with each increasingly frantic message. The first few from Robert were confused. Mom, hey, just wanted to make sure you got home okay. Call me back. Then concerned. Mom, seriously, where are you? Sharon Matthews said she saw you at the train station with some guy. What's going on? Then angry. I've called you 7 times. This isn't funny. Chelsea's worried sick. Chelsea's worried sick. That almost made me laugh. Chelsea who couldn't be bothered to pick me up. Chelsea who was more concerned about her hair appointment than whether I made it home safely from surgery. But now that there was gossip involved, now that someone had seen me with James, suddenly she was worried sick. Chelsea's voicemails were different in tone but equally revealing. Eleanor, I'm trying not to jump to conclusions here, but Sharon said the man who picked you up kissed you. She said it looked intimate. I think we deserve an explanation, don't you? Robert's really upset. Robert's really upset. Not we're concerned about you. Not we want to make sure you're okay after your surgery. Just Robert's upset because his mother was seen with a man and people are talking, and how dare I cause a scandal in their perfect little lives. The later voicemails devolved into desperation. Robert's voice cracking slightly. "Mom, please. If something's wrong, if you're mad at us, just tell me. I'm your son. Don't shut me out like this. Don't shut me out." The irony was almost poetic. I want to pause here for just a moment. If you're watching this and you're thinking about your own family, your own relationships, the ways you might have taken someone for granted, do me a favor. After you finish this video, check the description box below. Read some of the other stories there. Then maybe, just maybe, pick up the phone and call someone you've been meaning to check on. Because I'm going to tell you something true, we don't always get the chance to fix these things before it's too late. Subscribe to hear more stories like this, share this video if you think someone needs to hear it, but most importantly, learn from my mistakes and theirs. James had given me space to process everything, to sit with the weight of 52 missed calls and what they represented. But around 9:30, he came and sat down beside me on the couch. "You don't owe them an explanation," he said quietly. "Not on their timeline. Not when you're still recovering from surgery." "I know. But you're going to give them one anyway, aren't you?" I looked at him then, this man who'd shown up for me without hesitation, who'd asked for nothing in return, who'd seen me not as someone's mother but as Eleanor, a complete person worthy of care and attention. "I have to," I said. "Not for them. For me. Because I need to say things I should have said years ago." He nodded, understanding in a way that comes from his own experience with complicated family dynamics. His daughter had barely spoken to him after her mother died, angry at him for some perceived failure in Margaret's final months that James still didn't fully understand. "Do you want me to take you home?" Home. My empty house with its silent rooms and Daniel's ghost still lingering in the corners. Or here, where someone had made me soup and bought me flowers and treated my recovery like it actually mattered. "Not yet," I whispered. "Is that okay?" "Eleanor, you can stay as long as you need. Forever, if you want." Forever. The word hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us was quite ready to examine. I called Robert back at 10 p.m. He answered on the first ring. "Mom. Jesus Christ, where have you been?" "Recovering from surgery," I said evenly. "Where I told you I'd be." "Sharon Matthews said you were with some man. She said he kissed you. She said you got in his car and he drove you away." Robert's voice was tight, controlled, the way it got when he was trying not to explode. "Who is he? Why didn't you tell us about him? And why the hell are you with him instead of at home where you're supposed to be?" "Where you're supposed to be." As if I was a child who'd broken curfew instead of a grown woman who'd been abandoned by her own family in her time of need. "His name is James," I said calmly. "I met him 18 months ago at an art class. We're friends. Good friends. And when I asked my family for help getting home from the train station after major surgery and you told me you had a soccer tournament and a hair appointment, James didn't hesitate. He drove over an hour to pick me up. He prepared a room for me. He made sure I had everything I needed. So yes, I'm with him. Because he showed up." Silence on the other end. Long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Then, you never told us about any art class. You never asked what I do with my time." "Mom, that's not fair." "Isn't it?" I cut him off, and there was steel in my voice I didn't recognize. "When's the last time you asked about my life, Robert? Not how I'm doing, because we both know that's just pleasantries. I mean really asked. What I do on Tuesday evenings. Who my friends are. Whether I'm lonely. Whether I'm happy. When's the last time?" More silence. "I had surgery, Robert. A real surgery with real risks. And I asked you, my only son, for 3 hours of your time. 3 hours to pick me up from a train station. And you told me you were too busy. You told me to get a rideshare. Like I was asking you to drive me to the grocery store instead of making sure I didn't collapse alone after being put under anesthesia and having a mass removed from my body." "Mom, the tournament." "The tournament doesn't start until Saturday. I checked. So that excuse doesn't even work." I heard him exhale, heard the sound of a door closing, probably him leaving whatever room Chelsea was in so she wouldn't hear this conversation. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I should have been there. Chelsea and we've just been so busy with Bennett and work and everything, and I guess I thought you'd be fine because you're always fine. You're the strongest person I know. And there it was. The thing I'd been trying to articulate for years but hadn't found the words for until this exact moment. Being strong doesn't mean I don't need people, Robert. It doesn't mean I don't need you. Your father died 7 years ago and you just assumed I was okay because I kept functioning. But functioning isn't the same as thriving. Surviving isn't the same as living. And I have been so lonely, and you didn't notice because I didn't make you notice. I made it too easy for you to forget about me. I could hear him breathing, unsteady, and I wondered if he was crying. I didn't know, he said finally, voice thick. I didn't know you felt that way. I know you didn't. And that's my fault too. But James knows. James asks. James shows up. And I'm not sorry you found out about him this way because maybe it's exactly what needed to happen for you to see me again. Are you in a relationship with him? It was the question I'd been avoiding, even in my own mind. What were James and I, exactly? We'd never defined it, never pushed it beyond friendship, though there had been moments, glances, touches that lingered a second too long. I don't know, I said honestly. We're two people who found each other when we were both lonely. Two people who actually see each other. Whatever label you want to put on that is up to you. Does he make you happy? The question surprised me. It was the first thing Robert had asked that wasn't about him, about how this affected him, about what people would think. Yes, I whispered. He does. Then I'm glad you had him to call. I'm glad someone was there for you. A pause. Even though it should have been me. We talked for another 20 minutes after that. Real talking, the kind we hadn't done in years. I told him about the art class, about the walks in the park, about the Tuesday evenings that had become the highlight of my week. He told me about the stress at work he'd been hiding, about Bennett's struggles in school, about his marriage to Chelsea that was starting to feel more like a business partnership than a romance. We were being honest with each other, maybe for the first time since Daniel died. But I didn't go home that night. Or the next night. I stayed with James through the weekend, letting him take care of me, letting myself be vulnerable in a way I'd forgotten how to be. And when Robert and Chelsea came by on Sunday afternoon, supposedly to check on me but really to size up James and this situation they couldn't quite believe was real, I introduced them with my head held high. This is James Mitchell. He's important to me. Chelsea looked between us with barely concealed shock. Robert just looked sad, like he was finally understanding everything he'd missed, everything he'd taken for granted. Bennett, who'd come along despite this not being his regular weekend with me, went straight to James and asked if he liked soccer. Love it, James said, getting down to Bennett's eye level. Who's your favorite team? And just like that, with that simple gesture of attention to my grandson, I watched my family start to recalibrate their understanding of who I was. I wasn't just mom. I wasn't just grandma. I was Eleanor. And I had chosen, finally, to choose myself. But the real revelation was still coming. The thing they didn't know yet, the detail that would reframe this entire situation in a way none of them expected. James wasn't just some man I'd met at an art class. He was the recently retired chief of surgery at County Memorial Hospital. And he'd already called in favors to get me a second opinion on my biopsy results, because something about the imaging had concerned him, something the Pittsburgh doctors had missed. The results would come back on Tuesday. And when they did, when Robert and Chelsea realized that the man they'd been so quick to judge was actually the reason I caught the misdiagnosis before it became something much worse, before it became the thing that actually killed me, they were going to have to live with a very uncomfortable truth. Their soccer tournament and hair appointment had almost cost them something irreplaceable. And the stranger they'd resented for picking me up from the train station had saved my life. Tuesday morning came with the kind of cold that settles into your bones and won't let go. I was back at my own house by then, still recovering but stronger each day, mobile enough to make my own coffee and sit in the early morning light coming through my kitchen windows. The house didn't feel quite so empty anymore. Funny how that works. Nothing physical had changed, but everything felt different. James had texted me at 6:30 am. Results came in. I'm coming over. Put the kettle on. My hands were shaking as I filled the kettle. In my gut, I already knew. You don't live in a body for 63 years without developing an instinct for when something's wrong. The Pittsburgh doctors had been confident, reassuring, congratulatory even. Benign, they'd said. Clean margins. 6 weeks recovery and you'll be good as new. But James had looked at the imaging differently. He'd seen something in the border of the mass that concerned him, some irregular shading that everyone else had dismissed. He'd sent everything to a colleague in oncology without telling me, not wanting to worry me until there was something concrete to worry about. Now there was. He arrived at 7:15 with coffee and croissants from the French bakery on Main Street, the one that opens absurdly early and charges absurdly high prices. His face was serious but not grim. Concerned but not defeated. "Tell me," I said as soon as he walked in. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Daniel and I had shared thousands of meals, where Robert had done his homework, where I'd paid bills and sorted mail and lived the mundane, precious moments of an ordinary life. "The Pittsburgh team missed it," James said carefully. "What they removed was mostly benign, but there were atypical cells in the margin. Precancerous. Another few months and we would have been looking at a very different situation." The words settled over me like snow. Quiet. Cold. Transformative. How different. Stage 2, possibly stage 3 given the location and your age. Aggressive treatment. Radiation, maybe chemo. Survival rates that I don't even want to discuss because they're not relevant now. We caught it early enough that a second procedure to remove the remaining tissue should be sufficient. Clean margins this time. Follow-up monitoring. But Eleanor, if we hadn't caught this now. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I thought about the train ride home. About sitting alone in that hospital room. About texting my family and receiving a thumbs-up emoji in response. About what would have happened if I hadn't had James, if I'd just gone home and recovered and assumed everything was fine because that's what the doctors had told me. I would have died. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not even this year. But those atypical cells would have kept growing, kept mutating, kept spreading until they became something unstoppable. And my family would have been too busy with soccer tournaments and hair appointments to notice until it was far too late. "When do I need to go back?" I asked. My voice was steady. Practical. This was just another problem to solve, another challenge to face. 2 weeks. I've already coordinated with Dr. Sarah Chan in Pittsburgh. She's one of the best oncological surgeons in the region. She's reviewed everything and agrees with my assessment. She's furious that her team missed it, by the way. She's implementing new protocols. We sat in silence for a moment, drinking coffee, processing the magnitude of what we were discussing. "I need to tell Robert," I said finally. "Yes. You do. He's going to lose his mind when he realizes what almost happened." James reached across the table and took my hand. "Good. Maybe he should." I called Robert at 8 a.m., before I could second-guess myself. He answered sounding groggy, probably not even out of bed yet. "Mom? Everything okay?" Such a loaded question, in retrospect. "I need you to come over. Now. Bring Chelsea if you want, but come now." The tone in my voice must have conveyed urgency because he didn't argue, didn't make excuses. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He made it in 15. James stayed with me, a quiet presence sitting beside me on the couch when Robert and Chelsea arrived. Robert's eyes went immediately to James, something complicated crossing his face. Resentment, maybe, or embarrassment, or the slow dawning recognition that this man was clearly not going anywhere. "What's going on?" Robert asked, choosing to sit in the armchair across from us rather than beside me like he normally would have. Creating distance. Maintaining boundaries. I told them everything. The conversation was clinical at first, medical details that James helped explain when my voice faltered. Atypical cells. Precancerous margins. The second surgery that was now necessary. The timeline we were working with. Chelsea's hand went to her mouth. Robert's face went pale. "But they said it was benign," Robert said, his voice small. "They said you were fine." "They were wrong," James said simply. "It happens more often than people realize." Medical errors are the third leading cause of death in this country. How did you? Robert looked at James, understanding slowly crystallizing. You're a doctor. Was. I'm retired. But yes. Surgeon, specifically. Chief of surgery at County Memorial for 15 years before I retired 3 years ago. James's voice was matter-of-fact, neither proud nor defensive. Just stating facts. I watched Robert process this information, recalculating everything he'd assumed about this man who'd picked me up from the train station. Not some random man his mother had met at an art class. A surgeon. Someone with expertise and connections and the ability to literally save lives. Someone who'd saved mine. Why didn't you tell us? Chelsea asked, looking at me. Tell you what? That I'd met someone? That I'd made a friend? When would I have told you? I kept my voice level, not accusatory, just honest. When you'd plans with me 3 times in a row. When you dropped Bennett off without staying to talk. When you called only to ask for babysitting. Chelsea had the grace to look ashamed. Robert was still staring at James like he was trying to solve a complicated equation. You looked at her imaging. You got a second opinion. I did. Something felt off to me about the original report. I have a colleague who specializes in oncology, so I asked him to take a look. He agreed with my concerns. James squeezed my hand gently. Your mother thinks I saved her life. I think I just paid attention when other people didn't. The words hung there, heavy with double meaning. Robert's face crumpled then, and I realized with a start that he was crying. Actually crying, tears streaming down his face in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. I almost lost you, he whispered. I almost lost you and I wasn't even there. You had surgery and you were alone and I told you I was too busy for a soccer tournament that didn't even start until 2 days later and you could have died and I would have spent the rest of my life knowing that the last thing I did was tell you to get a rideshare. Robert. No, Mom. Let me say this. He wiped his face roughly with his sleeve. I've been a terrible son. Not just with the train station, with everything. Since Dad died, I've just assumed you were okay because you seemed okay. Because you kept showing up for Bennett, kept hosting holidays, kept being Mom. But I never asked if you were happy. I never asked if you needed anything. I never even thought about the fact that you were alone. I wasn't alone, I said quietly, looking at James. I know that now. And I'm glad. I'm so glad you had someone who actually gave a damn. Robert stood up abruptly, paced to the window, paced back. When Sharon Matthews called me and said she saw you with a man at the train station, you know what my first thought was? Not concern. Not happiness that someone was there for you. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed that people would talk, that they'd gossip about my mom dating someone. How messed up is that? Chelsea reached out and touched his arm, her own eyes red. We've been so wrapped up in our own lives, she said, and her voice was genuinely remorseful. Eleanor, I am so sorry. About the train station, about the hair appointment excuse that was just... It was pure selfishness. I could have rescheduled. I should have been there. I looked at both of them, these two people who'd hurt me so badly just days ago, and I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not exactly. But understanding, maybe. Recognition that we all fail each other sometimes, that we all get so caught up in our own struggles that we stop seeing the people right in front of us. I appreciate that, I said. I do. But I need you both to understand something. This isn't just about the train station. This is about years of me making myself small so you could be big. Years of me pretending I didn't need anything so you wouldn't feel guilty. Years of me being strong because I thought that's what you needed from me. What do you need from us? Robert asked, his voice raw. It was such a simple question. Such an important question. And nobody had asked it in so long. I need you to see me, I said. Not just as your mother or Bennett's grandmother or someone who exists to support you. I need you to see me as Eleanor. A whole person with my own life and my own needs and my own capacity for loneliness and joy and love. I want to do better, Robert said. I want to be the son you deserve. Tell me how. James stood up then, understanding that this was a moment for family. I'm going to step outside, give you some space. No, I said, catching his hand. Stay. Please. Because you're part of this now. Part of my life. And they need to understand that. Robert looked at our joined hands, and something in his expression softened. He makes you happy, doesn't he? Really happy? Yes. Then that's all that matters. Robert crossed the room and sat down on the couch beside me, on my other side. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry it took 52 phone calls and a small-town scandal to make me wake up. But I'm here now, Mom. I'm really here. Chelsea joined us, sitting on the arm of the couch, her hand on my shoulder. We both are. We talked for 2 hours after that. Real conversation, the kind where you actually listen instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. Robert told me about his struggles at work, about feeling inadequate as a father, about missing Daniel more than he'd ever admitted. Chelsea talked about her own mother, who'd passed away when she was young, and how she'd never learned how to be a daughter-in-law because she'd never seen it modeled. They asked about James, about how we'd met, about the art class and the Tuesday evenings and the slow building of something neither of us had been looking for but both of us needed. And I told them about the loneliness. About the empty house and the silent dinners and the nights when I'd wondered if this was all there was left of my life. About James walking into that art class and reminding me that I was still Eleanor, still capable of being seen and valued and chosen. When they finally left, Robert hugged me tight enough that I felt it in my still healing surgical sites. I love you, Mom. I'm going to do better. I promise. I love you too, I whispered. And I believe you. After they were gone, James and I sat together in the quiet of my living room. The morning had stretched into afternoon. The coffee was long cold. Everything felt different, like the world had shifted slightly on its axis. That went well, James said. It went honestly. That's better than well. Are you scared? About the second surgery? I considered the question. A little. But mostly I'm grateful. Grateful we caught it. Grateful you were paying attention. Grateful I'm still here to be scared. He pulled me closer, and I rested my head on his shoulder, this man who'd shown up when no one else did, who'd literally saved my life by caring enough to question, to doubt, to dig deeper. Eleanor Catherine Wright, he said softly. What am I going to do with you? Love me, I said. If you want to. If you're ready for that. I've been ready, he admitted. I've been in love with you since that third Tuesday when you laughed at your own terrible painting and said, well, at least I'm consistent in my mediocrity. I've just been waiting for you to be ready too. I'm ready now. We sat like that as afternoon turned to evening, as the light changed and the shadows lengthened and my phone buzzed periodically with messages from Robert. Checking in, asking if I needed anything, slowly learning how to be present. 3 weeks later, I had the second surgery. James was there when I went in and there when I woke up. But so was Robert, who'd taken the day off work. And Chelsea, who'd brought flowers. And Bennett, who'd made me a card that said get well soon, Grandma, with a drawing of what I think was supposed to be a train but looked more like a rectangle with wheels. The surgery was successful. Clean margins this time. Dr. Chen apologized profusely for her team's oversight, though I held no blame toward her. Mistakes happen. What matters is that we caught it before it became irreversible. 6 months have passed since that train ride home from Pittsburgh. 6 months since I sent that message to the family group chat asking for a simple ride home. 6 months since my phone lit up with 52 missed calls and everything changed. Robert and I have dinner together every Wednesday now. Just the two of us, no phones, no distractions. We're rebuilding something that had gotten lost in the years of taking each other for granted. Chelsea and I have started meeting for coffee on Saturday mornings, and I'm teaching her some of Daniel's old recipes that Robert grew up with. Bennett spends more time at my house, but now they stay and visit instead of just dropping him off. And James. James moved his things into my house 3 months ago, not because I needed someone to take care of me, but because we'd both gotten tired of saying goodnight and going to separate homes. The house doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels full in all the right ways. I still go to art class on Tuesday evenings, but now James comes with me. We're both still terrible at painting, but that's not really the point. I've learned something important through all of this, something I want to share with you before we end this story. Being strong doesn't mean you don't need people. Being independent doesn't mean you have to be alone. And teaching your family that you're always fine means they'll never know when you're not. Ask for help. Ask to be seen. Ask for what you need, even when it feels vulnerable, especially when it feels vulnerable. Because the people who love you can't read your mind, and sometimes they need to be reminded that you're more than just the role you play in their lives. And if they can't show up for you, if they choose soccer tournaments and hair appointments over your well-being, then maybe, just maybe, it's time to let other people in. People who will show up. People who will see you. People who will pick you up from train stations and question your medical results and love you not because of what you do for them but because of who you are. Robert asked me once, a few weeks after everything happened, if I'd planned it. If I'd known that having James pick me up would cause such chaos, would force them to confront their own neglect. I told him the truth. I hadn't planned anything. I'd just been a woman who needed a ride home after surgery, and I'd called the one person I knew would say yes without hesitation. Everything else, all the revelations and confrontations and changes, those were just the natural consequences of people finally paying attention. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planned at all. Sometimes it's just living your life fully, choosing people who choose you back, and letting the chips fall where they may. My phone still has that family group chat. But now it's actually active. Robert sends photos of Bennett's soccer games. Chelsea shares recipes she's trying. I post pictures of my paintings, and yes, they're still pretty terrible, but they're mine. And sometimes James sends messages too, because he's family now. Really family, not by blood or marriage, but by choice. By showing up. By being there in the moments that matter. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me share this with you. And please check the description box below. There are more stories there, stories from people who've learned hard lessons about love and family and what it means to be seen. Stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. Subscribe if you want to hear more. Share this if you know someone who needs to. Comment and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story if you want to share it. But most importantly, go call someone you love. Don't wait until it takes 52 missed calls to get their attention. Life's too short, and too precious, and too full of unexpected train stations where we all need someone to pick us up. I'm Eleanor Catherine Wright. I'm 63 years old. I survived cancer because someone cared enough to pay attention. And I learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, to ask for what you need, and to let yourself be loved by people who actually show up. That's my story. Thank you for being here for it.